How's my credit in this joint anyway?
Your credit's fine, Mr. Thomas.
That's swell. I like you, Lloyd. I always liked you. You were always the best of them. Best goddamn bartender from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine.
Whoa! Killer Molotov, bro! Does that thing have LED lights in it?
Hola and welcome back to my little corner of the internet. And in today's video, I'm going to be doing some more work on my kitchen bar. And one step that's been holding me up is the countertops. I was going to do concrete countertops, but with a little bit of flair. I've seen some really cool pictures and videos where people actually add fiber optic wire embedded into the concrete. And it gives a really cool, custom, unique look. So the fiber optic system I'm using is not actually glass, it's more of a special kind of a plastic wire. So this system's not going to get you 500 videos across the Atlantic in 4 milliseconds. But it will get you 500 pinpoint lights embedded within your concrete with your light source mounted remotely.
Let me ask you a question, Joanna. What do you think of a person who only does the bare minimum?
And I've already got the mold made up. So this is actually a reverse mold. So what I'm going to end up doing is drilling hundreds of little holes in this mold, embedding each one of those fibers into that hole, and then this gets filled with concrete so that when you flip it back over, the hole that I drilled is going to be the top surface, and you should see little tiny pinpoint lights all over the place. So my next step is actually to take the mold, map out and drill probably 300 holes in this thing. So that'll be a tedious process. I set everything up so I can work on it from any angle, and I even used the 3D printed motion control camera to help film. I knew I wanted some order out of chaos with the light pattern. I wanted all the near the top of the pyramids to have straight lines, and the rest of the points of light are just randomly sprinkled around. The drill bit I used was super tiny, and I ended up snapping like 4 of them. It was the smallest drill I had, and the fibers were still pretty loose, but I ended up just dipping each fiber into regular wood glue, and that seemed to do pretty well with securing them in place. I was trying to organize all the wires as I went along, and what's pretty neat is it subconsciously evolved into what looks like a central nervous system. It's almost as if life's not random.
I wish I could tell you more pertinent news, but we're in a rating system here, and the key factor is sensationalism.
Obviously, there's a continuity issue. I did make the rebar shape prior to doing any of the lighting work. I had to rearrange the rebar so it wouldn't interfere with that foam section in my mold. I really don't think the welding is necessary, but it will be easier later when I'm pouring concrete and it's only one piece. I showed the mold prepping the rebar and gluing and drilling all the fiber wires, but the montage happened so fast I really didn't get to show any details. I didn't mention anything about building the mold, but that's pretty easy and there's a ton of videos out there. I didn't mention anything about how the fiber optic wire actually has a different brightness depending on what angle you're looking at it from. So I ended up drilling the holes at random angles to break up the consistency and make the lights look a little bigger or smaller depending on where you're standing. I'm hoping it's going to have that effect like one of those pictures where the eyes stare at you no matter where you are in the room. One thing I overlooked completely is how I use my custom-built laser engraving machine with that Dremel attachment to cut out all the foam pieces to round off the corners inside the mold and have that cavity space for the oak cutting board and infinity mirror. I was going to do a completely separate video on that machine, so I should probably just tell people to subscribe and hit that notification bell.
What are you going to do about that footage you forgot to record for the next build montage?
I didn't forget. I just got super excited when I was prepping the mold for the next step that I neglected to hit the record button.
Wait a minute, didn't you tell me that you put up cameras out in your backyard because there was something eating fish out of your pond?
Yeah, it's a terrible perspective, but it could work. I'll just play with the zoom, some slow-mo shots. People love that shit in a montage.
90-pound bags.
So I'm using regular general purpose concrete. So I'm trying to be delicate laying it in there. I'm trying not to crush any of the wires. And I tried putting all the concrete in between the main trunk lines of fiber optic wires. A lot of tutorials I watched recommended using a sander to vibrate your mold, but I actually had better results using my hammer drill and a wide chisel bit. I went around all the edges and the bottom of the mold after every time I added some concrete. I was trying to get that concrete to flow in between the wires. I should also mention that I used a few additives in the mix. I used a wetting agent and 1 bottle of charcoal coloring into each 90-pound bag.
90-pound bags.
Hand mixing 90-pound bags of concrete to the proper water/material ratio is definitely a lot of work, and that's where the wetting agent comes in.
180, 100, 187. Where did you get this stuff?
Home Depot.
Oh,
That additive does exactly as advertised. The concrete becomes more fluid without actually adding more water. It's still a lot of work to mix, but more importantly, it's going to flow around all those wires without leaving voids or air pockets.
90-pound bags.
This is the cardiovascular part of our workout. Develop your heart and lung muscles. Let your heels touch down and don't forget to breathe.
Hey, thanks for the tip, Jane, but this is a lot of work. I think I'm just going to buy a mixer. I have a whole bunch more work to do on my backyard pond and the barbecue island. I don't mind hard work, but this is going to be a time issue. The countertops in the backyard are quite a bit bigger, and I'm going to have to pour a lot of concrete in a short amount of time. I ended up adding a little too much concrete on this pass, so I used my trusty rotor hammer again to help push the rebar a little bit further down into the concrete. I had to mix up 1 more bag to fill the rest of the mold. This is actually the bottom side of the countertop, so I'm not too worried about the finish, and it just needs a quick screed. I'm definitely not a pro. Pretty much anybody can do this.
Yeah. Your countertop bar sounds amazing and simple to build, but I just want a ton of money playing poker. Let's go to Austin and party like it's 2019.
Well, I just finished pouring the concrete for my countertop, so I need to let that dry for the next 4 or 5 days. I'm in.
The timeline skewed into this tangent.
Before I left on my journey, I hosed everything down with water and wrapped it in plastic to help slowly cure the concrete over the next few days.
You're cutting him off. Is he still driving? We're ending.
This time we request that you put your mask back on and put your chair in its upright
There's no place like home.
So I just got back from my trip from Austin. I had a great time, but it's only been 3 days, and the concrete mix I use, they recommend at least a week. I think it's 75% strength in 7 days, so I'm gonna let that hang out for a little bit longer, but I can move to one more thing, which is the eye of the pyramid. And originally I was gonna do like a cast resin, like an opaque white resin, and then backlight it from underneath, and that was gonna make it glow. But then I had this cool idea of using an infinity mirror, which if you haven't seen them, they're super neat, but all you need is a piece of regular mirror, some LED strip, and then a piece of security glass or one-way glass. And this is how it works.
An infinity mirror consists of 2 mirrors facing each other. The border of light images of the light bounce back and forth repeatedly between the 2 mirrors.
This creates the illusion that the images retreat towards infinity, hence the name.
If you truly want to know how infinity mirrors work, the internet is at your fingertips. I can only show you what I do. Since I modeled everything up earlier to cut out the foam parts for the mold, I already had the shape I needed to make the insert to hold the LED lights and one-way mirror. I use these LED strips for everything. They're RGB and they have a white channel. The thing that sets these apart from other similar strips is both the RGB and white diodes are on the same SMD. So you get more consistent light when you're mixing colors and whites. You can set these lights up any way you want. I just happen to have multiple controllers, which lets me adjust things independently, and they work with my home automation. This whole idea started because I found that sample piece of one-way mirror plexiglass that I was going to use for another project years ago. I've never made an infinity mirror, but I knew of them, and the sample mirror was like the perfect size to add one more piece of flair to the bar top.
People can get a cheeseburger anywhere, okay? They come to Tchotchkes for the atmosphere and the attitude.
I thought that bracket I 3D printed would help hold the one-way mirror, but it turns out it just needed some light sanding after the bandsaw, and the mirror fit perfectly. The regular mirror is just hot glued to the underside of the countertop. and I installed all the electronics on the right-hand cabinet so that I can access them later after the fridge is installed. I'm not going to show any B-roll of the inside of that cabinet just yet. It's a total wiring mess.
Because I envy your normal life. Put the gun down, David. It seems that envy is my sin.
So I messed up this montage too, but it was sort of on purpose. I was trying to stay in tune with the building timeline, but the problem is... Hold on a second, I was just working on a transition.
I'm at an underground cockfight here in Phuket, so I've got to be quick.
The problem is all my B-roll shows the final surface. I had to do so much more work of grinding and polishing to get that countertop super smooth and reflective. It's hard to capture on camera just how good it actually looks. I read somewhere the human eye has like 550 megapixel or something like that if it was a camera.
Don't worry, the countertop looks amazing. Just do one more montage for the grinding and the polishing, and you're done. This thing is a wrap.
Special surprise bankroll and fighting tonight.
Okay, I've got to go. Bankroll!
So I'm down to brandy and grenadine as my mixer, and it's come to my attention through self-awareness and text messaging that perhaps the wrap was a bad idea. Cringy was the term, actually. And you know, I thought everything was going to be okay. Added up, referring to the amount of weight per bag, and bankroll referring to the amount of cost per bag. And I apologize if any of you actually felt cringed. And if any of you guys haven't figured out what's going on, I can explain everything.
Think about me one more time before you go.
I knew the look I was going for, which was to expose the aggregate within the concrete. And my first step was actually to grind off that top layer. So I used my 7-inch floor grinder, and it has a diamond cup wheel on the end. And that's super good at removing material, so you gotta be careful. On the first pass, I actually used just enough pressure to keep the tool level, no real down pressure on it. And I did a quick pass and then hosed it off to see what it looked like. And I needed a little bit more work in the back. So I went with one more heavier pass and cleaned up the whole surface again. And that was just enough to get all the big aggregate exposed, pretty much just the way I wanted it. Now there were a couple of small errors, but that was built into the countertop from the mold making process, my own fault. But again, the whole idea of this was supposed to be rustic, so I'm actually okay with some of those errors. And there's quite a few continuity errors within this video. Most of the B-roll footage I've been showing is actually the finished product, but there's one more step you have to do if you want to get those super smooth finishes. It's more like 14 more steps, which consists of using these diamond buffing pads ranging from 30 grit all the way up to 6,000. And just like sanding, you start with the lowest and work all the way up to the 6,000 grit. The proper tool to use here would have been a variable speed polisher designed for wet grinding, but as soon as the pads showed up in the mail, I couldn't resist and I just used my angle grinder. A regular angle grinder actually spins too fast, and it's going to make the job a little more difficult than it needs to be. I did try making a little speed reducer with some parts I had laying around in the garage.
Took the restrictor plate off, give the Red Dragon a little more juice.
But it really wasn't designed for the amperage of an angle grinder.
But let's keep that on the down low. It's not exactly street legal. Hey, Mike.
That speed controller lasted about 5 minutes before it started smoking. I'll definitely be buying the proper tools for the next sequel.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole? You could say that. I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
Man, I'm gonna run out of cocktail before I finish this skit. So I'm down to brandy and Grenadine?
You did a great job. Don't you feel good? I'll see you next time. Bravo!
You're taking me far, far from my avatar. I think I get a bit addicted. It's the fear to get afflicted, but nothing worries me. We are on the run, and beautiful flight. Don't be afraid, I'm the one. We are better than that. Your touch sets the universe on fire.
Well, I can barely hear you over the sound of the slot machines, but let me tell you, that countertop looks pretty darn amazing.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. And that I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see.
So the original plan was actually to reshoot a parody of this scene using our 3D printed motion control robot, but that probably would have delayed some of our other projects, so we decided against reshooting that because it actually has nothing to do with concrete countertops. Some critics might even claim we should have left more footage on the cutting room floor, but we had some great cameos on set during filming, and we let our writing team inject those characters into the story. And it actually turned out great for us. We were looking for a way to add some additional time at the end of the video for thumbnail merchandising.